Hi, I'm Adam Drake, and today I want to do a nitro versus electric comparison. I'm asked quite often for setup sheets for both nitro and electric cars, and sometimes you'll see that there's very little variance between the two cars as far as setup goes, and in other conditions, they could be quite a bit different. Now, typically, when running on the same track conditions, we're using the same tires. Now with some of the battery technology, the weight of the vehicle from nitro to electric is very similar. In years past, the electric cars were always 200 to 300 grams heavier than a nitro car. Now with the ProTech high voltage batteries, the weights are very, very similar, and in a lot of cases they can be almost exactly the same from nitro to electric. There is some differences though. In nitro, the center of gravity is much higher. You have a big cooling head. Also in nitro, the weight is changing throughout the run and before and after pit stops. So there are some differences, but what I've done with my cars is I try to set them up very similar. And one of the reasons why I'm able to do that is because even if the weight is slightly different, I'll throw both cars on scales, and I always try to make sure that the weight distribution front to back is the same percentage-wise from nitro to electric. So back in the day, even when my electric car was 200 grams heavier, I would always try to adjust the battery positioning to where it had the same weight distribution. Now, my nitro and electric buggies are really, really close in weight. It can vary, but in most cases, I'm within 40 to 50 grams from electric to nitro. Electric's sometimes still a little bit heavier, but very close in weight. So that's why you'll always see, or almost all the time see on my nitro car, I run a 20 gram weight in the back. In my electric car, I almost never run a 20 gram weight in the back. And again, that's because I position the battery and my electronics to where it'll have the same balance of weight. But another big difference between the two is the delivery of the power. Obviously, nitro car has a clutch. Clutch is going to engage much smoother and not have as direct power as an electric car. That's why you see so much in the past. I've always used the Techno traction drive, kind of like a slipper clutch, to make the transition between the two vehicles easier for me and easier to kind of time jumps and rhythm sections. Well, lately I've taken the traction drive off. I've just been using a pinion because I feel like there's been some tracks where you need that additional grunt and power to get over stuff. When you're racing other guys with e-buggies that are not using a clutch, they can maybe quad something that you're not able to do because of the traction drive slipping. So to compensate for that, I run a little bit lighter center diff in my electric car than what I used to. So now my center diff is almost the same, or in a lot of cases, it is the same as my nitro car. It's 7,000. Where in the past, if you look at some of my older setup sheets when I used the traction drive system, I almost always ran 10,000 in the center diff. Another thing is, again, like I mentioned, the center of gravity of the cars is a little bit different. With it being a little bit lower center of gravity on the e-buggy, you may want to run a little bit thinner sway bar just to kind of get a little bit more initial roll off center. But for the most part, I try to set up and tune the weight of my cars to where they drive very similar because I have similar characteristics with the setup. In some cases, if the e-buggy just has too much power, you may need to go down even more in the center diff. But I like to tune and adjust my speed controller and also maybe a couple adjustments on my radio to try to get the two cars to drive as similar as possible so I can share as much setup information between the two. It's nice to be able, when you're at a race, even though both classes are just as important, you're able to, if you're struggling a little bit with the e-buggy, you can try something on the Nitro car that you can then transfer over to the electric car, or vice versa. So I know everyone has their own way of doing things, but for me, I try to have the two vehicles set up as close as possible, even though there's many, many differences between the two. And then that way I can kind of share setup and tuning information between the two vehicles. Back in the day when the e-buggies were a little bit heavier, there were times where I would run a little bit stiffer spring, mainly in the front. It just seemed like the electric car would always kind of get over the front, getting into the turn a little bit more. But now that I've been able to reduce the weight a little bit, for the most part, I run the same spring, 925 for electric and Nitro. But there are times when I will run a little bit stiffer front spring on the electric car. I think maybe with it not having a clutch and the ESC and the motor having just a little bit of drag brake, it allows the car to get over the front end a little bit when you let off getting into a turn. But overall, try to keep both setups as close as possible. Try to tune my cars before getting on the track as far as the weight distribution to get them to have the same weight balance. That way I can share setups between the two. So which is faster, Nitro or electric? That will depend on the track. In most cases, Nitro and electric pretty much are able to produce very similar lap times. I feel like if it's a really smooth track with a lot of grip, you're able to kind of lay that extra instantaneous power of the electric down and put down faster lap times with electric. And then it could go the other way. If it's a really bumpy, low grip track, I feel like because of the clutch and being able to tune the carburation of the engine, that sometimes you're able, with smoother power, to be able to put the grip to the ground and accelerate through bumps a little bit better. But just depends on the track. It also depends on what you're the most comfortable with. But in most cases, Nitro and electric should be able to produce almost identical lap times as long as you have the setups dialed in to your liking.